This is Janus Dispatch, Architecture over Narrative. Today's piece, Compound Ignorance, What Happens When Leaders Stop Reading and the World Doesn't Stop Moving. Quote, "The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge." End quote. Daniel J. Boorstin. Quote, "You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you." End quote. Leon Trotsky. The mechanism. Most failures arrive with warning. The one this essay describes does not. It accumulates quietly in the gap between what a leader knows and what the situation requires. The gap widens with every briefing left unread and every advisor whose contradictions have stopped being welcome. This essay is not about one leader. It is about a mechanism, one that has destroyed empires and collapsed institutions across centuries and civilizations. The mechanism is simple to describe and nearly impossible to reverse once it reaches critical mass. Compound ignorance, the exponential growth of what you don't know, driven by the compounding effect of what you didn't learn yesterday, making it impossible to understand what you encounter today. The mechanism mirrors compound interest in reverse. Both operate below the threshold of daily perception. Both make themselves visible only when the curve turns vertical, after the window for correction has closed. The formula. The mathematics of compound ignorance follow a predictable pattern. On day one, a leader skips a briefing. The cost is one data point. Manageable. Invisible. The world does not punish a single missed briefing. On day 10, the leader has missed the data point and the 9 subsequent data points that required the first one as context. The gap is no longer additive, it is multiplicative. Each missed input makes the next input less comprehensible. On day 30, the leader operates in a parallel world, one constructed from cable news, social media feedback loops, fabricated metrics, and the assurances of subordinates who have learned that delivering bad news ends careers. The parallel world feels complete. It has its own internal logic, its own metrics, its own rules, its own victories. But it is disconnected from the physical reality of shipping lanes, missile trajectories, currency flows, and alliance structures. On day 50, the leader is surprised by events that every analyst in every allied capital predicted weeks ago. Quote, "I'm surprised because they are really rich," end quote, said about a nation whose entire economy depends on a shipping lane the leader closed. The formula is not intelligence dependent. Brilliant people compound ignorance as efficiently as mediocre ones. The variable is not IQ, it is information diet. A genius who watches television instead of reading briefings will within weeks know less about the world than an average analyst who reads primary sources every morning. Case Study 1. Nikolaus II, the Tsar who didn't read the provinces. In the winter of 1916, the Russian Empire was cracking. Food shortages in Petrograd, mutinies at the front. The intelligence services produced detailed reports. The provincial governors sent warnings. Tsar Nikolaus II did not read them. He was at Stavka, military headquarters, far from Petrograd, surrounded by a small circle of officers who told him what he wanted to hear. His wife Alexandra, under the influence of Rasputin, sent letters urging him to ignore the pessimists and to trust in autocracy. The compound effect was devastating. By January 1917, Nikolaus did not understand the depth of popular anger because he had not read the reports that documented it. He did not understand that his own secret police considered revolution inevitable because the report sat on a desk he never visited. When the revolution came in February 1917, Nikolaus was genuinely surprised, not performing surprise, authentically surprised. His diary entry for the day reads like a weather report. He had compounded his ignorance so thoroughly that the end of a 300-year dynasty registered as an interruption to his afternoon routine. The cost, his dynasty, and 60 million Russians who would live under the consequences for the next 74 years. Case Study 2, Kaiser Wilhelm II, the monarch who fired Bismarck. Otto von Bismarck built the most sophisticated alliance system in European history. He kept France isolated, Russia friendly, Austria compliant, and Britain neutral simultaneously. It required constant attention and a mind that could hold 6 contradictory relationships in tension without resolving any of them. Wilhelm II fired Bismarck in 1890. The system was working. Bismarck contradicted him. The young Kaiser wanted a personal regime. Foreign policy driven by his own instincts and his own relationships with fellow monarchs. Within a decade, Wilhelm had undone every thread Bismarck had woven. The alliance with Russia lapsed because Wilhelm did not understand why Bismarck had maintained it. The relationship with Britain soured because Wilhelm built a navy that threatened British maritime supremacy without understanding that Britain would interpret it as existential. France found allies because Wilhelm's bluster pushed Russia and Britain into French arms. Austria grew reckless because Wilhelm issued guarantees without understanding the regional fault lines. By 1914, Germany was encircled. The exact outcome Bismarck had spent 30 years preventing, and Wilhelm, surrounded by generals who had learned not to contradict him, stumbled into a war that destroyed his empire and set the stage for the catastrophe that followed. The compound ignorance was not sudden. It accumulated over 24 years. Each diplomatic failure made the next one more likely, because the Kaiser lacked the contextual knowledge to understand why his moves were backfiring. He saw each crisis in isolation. He never connected Tuesday's bluster to Wednesday's consequence. Connecting them would have required reading the briefings that Bismarck's successors were still producing, briefings that told him things he did not want to hear. Case Study 3, Saddam Hussein, the dictator whose generals lied. By 2003, Saddam Hussein had constructed the purest compound ignorance engine in modern history. It was not that intelligence did not exist. Iraqi intelligence services were extensive and, in many areas, competent. The information was there. It simply could not survive the journey from analyst to dictator. The mechanism was fear. Generals who reported bad news were demoted or executed. Within a few years, the system optimized for a single output. Tell the leader what he wants to hear. Troop readiness reports were fabricated. Weapons inventories were inflated. Maintenance logs were forged. Training exercises were staged for the leader's benefit with no connection to actual capability. When the American invasion came, Saddam genuinely believed his Republican Guard divisions were intact and combat-ready. They collapsed in days. He believed his air defenses were operational. They were destroyed in hours. He believed his command structure was secure. It dissolved immediately. He believed Baghdad would hold. It fell in 3 weeks. The analysts knew. The generals on the ground knew. But compound ignorance, enforced by terror, had created a leader who inhabited a parallel reality with such completeness that the invasion itself was, to him, incomprehensible. Case Study 4. Vladimir Putin. 2022. 3 days to Kyiv. Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine was predicated on a single assumption. Kyiv would fall within 3 days. The assumption rested on intelligence that told the president what he wanted to hear, that Ukrainian resistance would collapse or that Zelensky would flee. The intelligence was wrong. Russian agencies had the capability. The pipeline that delivered information to the president did not. 2 decades of selection had optimized it for confirmation, and confirmation only. Dissent had been punished so consistently that it had been eliminated from the pipeline. By the time the invasion order was signed, Putin's information environment was as hermetic as Saddam's, with better furniture. The result, a 3-day operation that by spring 2026 has lasted over 4 years, hundreds of thousands of Russian casualties, an economy dependent on Chinese goodwill, a military exposed as hollow, and a leader who still, by all available reporting, believes he is winning. Compound ignorance does not require stupidity. It requires consistency, the consistent removal of disconfirming information from the leader's environment. Over time, the parallel world becomes indistinguishable from reality to the leader. To everyone else, the gap is obvious and growing. The counter case. Churchill, the leader who rehearsed defeat. Winston Churchill is remembered for his rhetoric. He should be remembered for his preparation. Before every major war cabinet meeting, Churchill conducted what he called stress tests, private sessions in which he argued against his own position. He demanded that his staff present the strongest possible counter-arguments. He cultivated a network of independent advisors, Frederick Lindemann and the Secret Circle, whose sole function was to tell him things the official channels would not. Churchill read voraciously, not summaries, primary documents, intelligence intercepts, field reports, raw economic data. He annotated them. He demanded follow-ups. His red dispatch boxes, the briefing folders delivered every evening, were returned every morning, covered in marginalia and questions. And Churchill rehearsed failure. Before the Normandy invasion, he wrote a draft communiqué announcing its failure. Not because he expected to lose, but because he wanted to feel the weight of the worst case. He wanted the possibility of defeat to be real in his mind, not theoretical. Because a leader who cannot imagine failure cannot prepare for it. The result was not infallibility. Churchill made mistakes. Gallipoli, the Bengal famine, the strategic bombing debate, and the Norway campaign. But his mistakes were informed mistakes. Mistakes made with full knowledge of the risks and the consequences. Not mistakes made from ignorance. Not mistakes made because the briefing sat unread on a desk while the leader watched television. The difference between Churchill and the leaders in the preceding case studies is not intelligence or courage. It is information discipline, the willingness to read what is uncomfortable, to hear what is unwelcome, to rehearse what is terrifying, and to face it every day, because compound ignorance does not take holidays. Information discipline is not exclusive to office. Churchill demonstrated it from inside power. Historians demonstrate it from outside. In May 2026, Timothy S. Snyder published a 13-pillar diagnostic of present American superpower decline. Assembled by reading the same documents, the leaders in his diagnosis had stopped reading. The discipline is identical regardless of the chair. Compound ignorance is a choice, not a consequence of position. Case Study 5. The Contemporary Pattern. In spring 2026, a leader of a major Western democracy is engaged in a military conflict in the Middle East. The conflict is in its 8th week. The following is documented from public statements and social media posts. The leader does not read daily intelligence briefings. He watches cable news. When asked about a specific financial mechanism, a currency swap, he responded by praising the affected country for being really rich. Meanwhile, the parliament speaker of an adversary nation posted Bloomberg terminal commands on social media, demonstrating granular knowledge of oil futures markets. One account on his social media platform posted a professionally crafted diplomatic statement written by staff. Hours later, the same account posted a screed calling a Wall Street Journal editor an idiot, clearly written by the leader himself. The adversary successfully mapped the latency between physical maritime control and paper market execution, generating hundreds of millions in trading profits timed to the minute. The leader, posting about his best poll numbers ever, while actual approval stood at 34%, believes the adversary's country is in tatters. This is compound ignorance at terminal velocity. Each week, the gap between the leader's understanding and the operational reality widens. Each week, the adversary's advantage grows. The advantage does not require brilliance. It requires reading the same world the leader has stopped reading. Falsifiability test. If this administration produces a strategic victory in the summer 2026 maritime and financial crisis through intuition alone, without re-establishing a primary intelligence pipeline, the model of compound ignorance is broken. If the adversary translates this information asymmetry into measurable market and territorial gains by Q3 2026, the mechanism is confirmed. 13 symptoms, 1 mechanism. On May 9, 2026, the historian Timothy S.N.Y. Dare published a diagnostic titled On Superpower Suicide. He counted 13 pillars of state power collapsing in parallel, spanning from statehood and elites to alliances and finances. The list is accurate. Each pillar is observable. Each failure is documented. But the list raises a sharper question. A leader cannot be failing in 13 separate dimensions at once by accident. Either the failures are coincidental, which the historical record makes unlikely, or there is one upstream variable, common to all 13, doing most of the work. That variable is the same one this essay has been describing. A leader who does not read resumes appoints a cabinet of Hegseth, Poutel, Kennedy, and Garbeard. An SNY's pillar of elites collapses. A leader who does not understand what an alliance buys reads NATO as a cost line, and the pillar of alliances collapses. The same engine runs through the other 11. From defunded science to victories declared in operations the leader's own forces dispute. Each pillar has its own failure mode. The fuel is identical across all of them. Information that did not reach the leader, because the leader had stopped reading and the pipeline had stopped delivering. SNY Dare counts the wreckage across 13 domains. Compound ignorance is the engine that produced it in each. Why the world does not wait. The deepest danger of compound ignorance is not the ignorance itself. It is the asymmetry it creates. A leader who stops learning does not stop the world from learning. Every day that a leader's knowledge stagnates, every adversary, every ally, every market participant, every analyst continues to accumulate knowledge. The gap is not static, it is dynamic, and it always favors the side that keeps reading. Iran, in 2026, trades oil futures at the Bloomberg terminal level while its adversary stumbles over what a currency swap is. European allies are building parallel defense structures because their former guarantor cannot articulate why he is dismantling the architecture his predecessors built. The asymmetry is not subtle, and it is not closing. This is not a failure of power. It is a failure of attention. And the cost of inattention compounds daily and weekly, until the leader who started with every advantage finds himself outmaneuvered by adversaries who started with almost none. Napoleon understood this. Quote, "A leader has the right to be beaten, but never the right to be surprised." End quote. Surprise is the product of compound ignorance. It is what happens when a leader has stopped reading long enough that reality has moved beyond the horizon of his understanding. And by the time surprise arrives, it is too late to catch up, because catching up would require understanding everything that was missed. And understanding everything that was missed would require having read the briefings that explained it. The loop is closed. The compound has run. The choice. Every leader faces the same choice every day. Read the briefing or skip it. Invite the contradicting advisor in or send him away. The choice seems small on any given day. One briefing, one uncomfortable truth. The cost of skipping it is invisible. The cost of engaging with it is real. Time. And the unpleasant sensation of discovering that the world is more complicated than the narrative suggests. But the choice compounds, and it compounds in both directions at once. Churchill's information discipline compounded into a war leader who could coordinate a global alliance across 4 years, because he understood, at granular level, what each front required and what each ally needed. His preparation compounded into trust. Allies who saw him reading their reports, understanding their constraints, rehearsing their fears, and respecting their intellect, believed he would not waste their soldiers' lives through ignorance. The leaders who chose differently, who fired the advisors and punished the messengers, compounded their ignorance into catastrophe, not overnight, over weeks and months, until the morning the revolution came, or the war started, or the ally defected, or the market crashed, and the leader stood in genuine, unperformed surprise, asking, "How did this happen?" The answer was always the same. It happened because you stopped reading, and the world didn't stop moving. Epilogue. The speed of the world. The case studies in this essay span 4 centuries. The mechanism is identical in each, but one variable has changed. Speed. Nikolaus had years of accumulated ignorance before the revolution. Wilhelm had decades. Saddam had a decade. Putin had years. In 2026, compound ignorance reaches critical mass in weeks. Leaders are not less intelligent than their predecessors. The world is faster. Information cycles that once took months now take hours. And alliance shifts that once took years now take weeks. The compounding window has shortened by orders of magnitude. A leader who stops reading in 2026 does not have the luxury of slow decline. The compound curve is steeper. The adversaries are faster. The markets are more unforgiving. And the consequences arrive before the leader has finished his morning post. The world is larger than any single leader. It does not pause for anyone's comfort. And it does not wait for anyone to catch up. The leaders who learn to live inside that asymmetry adapt to it. The ones who do not are eventually overtaken by it. The world publishes its briefings every day. They are not hidden. A leader who stops reading does not slow them down. He only ensures that what he eventually encounters arrives without preparation. At the speed of 2026, that gap is paid for in weeks, not decades. The choice compounds in both directions day by day. By the time the result becomes visible, the compounding has already done its work. This was Janus Dispatch. Compound Ignorance. Architecture over Narrative.